Greetings, and welcome to my channel. I'm the Anunnaki Theorist. Before I start, I've been doing this a lot lately, but I don't know, my body is just not being kind to me. I need to apologize. It's not COVID this time, thank the cosmos. No, I just have a really severe sinus infection, so I might sniffle, I might even cough. It's been pretty bad. So I just want to apologize if anything like that happens. That, and also I don't really sound like myself. So anyway, today I want to talk about what I call a tale of two Adams. Now, when we get into the mainstream religions, specifically the Abrahamic religions, we are only told about one Adam. And, that one Adam is, here in the Bible, and I'm using the King James Version. And it tells about how it says, "The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Okay, so this is talking about how God created man from the dust of the earth. In many of the creation myths, there's always some element of the earth that is used. Anything from dust and dirt to mud to wood, and then the Aztecs, I think it's the Aztecs, it's the Mesoamerican cultures. The final form of man came from corn. So there's always some kind of an element that already existed on Earth that was used to create man. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. Why was man created in the first place? Okay, in the Abrahamic mainstream religions, it's kind of alluded to that, God created, first of all, the angels, but the angels were supposed to be, ultra obedient. They worshiped God not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. If that's the case, then how do they explain Lucifer? So mankind was supposedly created because we had free will, and God wanted man to worship him because they wanted to do it, not because they were made to do it. The thing is, though, is when we get into the older texts, and that's where we get into, this is the Epic of Atrahasis, or some people pronounce it Atrasis. Now, who Atrahasis is, or Atrasis, that's actually the Babylonian version of Noah. In the Sumerian texts, it's Zasudra, or Utnapishtim, if we go with the Epic of Gilgamesh. But the reason why mankind was created, according to these ancient texts, is this. It says, "When the gods were men, they did forced labor, they bore drudgery. Great indeed was the drudgery of the gods. The forced labor was heavy, the misery too much. The 7 great Anunnaki gods were burdening the Igigi gods with forced labor." Okay, so who were the Igigi? It's the first thing we need to look at. Who were the Igigi? According to Zecharia Sitchin, the Igigi, they weren't like a lower caste of the Anunnaki. They were actually the astronauts. These were the ones that were, skilled in piloting the spacecraft, maintaining the spacecraft. But since this mission was on Earth and these spacecraft weren't being used, here you had, all these beings, all these people that weren't doing anything. So the Anunnaki, the higher-ups, they said, okay, you can't just be sitting around on your bum all day. You've got to do something. So they put them to work. And it says here, the gods were digging watercourses, canals they opened, the life of the land. Supposedly, the Igigi dug the Tigris and the Euphrates River. And then, according to Zecharia Sitchin, the whole reason why the Anunnaki came to Earth was gold. Now, originally, they started extracting gold from the water there in the Persian Gulf. But they weren't getting much. And Enki went and looked around, and he found that there was an abundance of gold in the Abzu. Now, the Abzu has a threefold meaning. The first is, Africa. Africa is the Abzu. South of the equator, Africa. And also under the ground. Literally under the earth. Okay, so that was the Abzu. And Enki found that there was large amounts of gold that can be dug out of the earth. So the Igigi, not only were they digging rivers and watercourses and everything, but they were also being made to work in the mines. Well, we see later on that these astronauts, their skills are in piloting ships and maintaining ships. They weren't ready for forced manual labor. I mean, and not just, regular manual labor, but heavy manual labor. I mean, we don't know exactly what their tools were. They could have had laser drills or whatever. We don't know. But according to the text here, it says that they actually set fire to their tools. Where's that at? They set fire to their tools. They put fire to their spaces and flame to their work baskets. So, I mean, according to this, it almost sounds like these tools were your standard pickaxes and shovels and things like this. And that is a possibility. They might not have had anything special like a laser drill or whatever. So yeah, they rebelled. And after they set fire to all their tools and everything like that, then they marched on Enlil in his palace, because Enlil was supposed to be, the commander of the whole mission. He was the one that actually made them work in the mines. Now, Enlil was upset about this, and he is the wrathful, he is the vengeful god, and he wanted the Igigi put to death. He wanted them executed for their rebellion. But then you have Enki, or in this case Ea, who, being the wise one, and also being somewhat of a mad scientist. Okay, we got to look at Enki. Enki was the very first Dr. Moreau. Okay, if anybody remembers the old story, it was a book, and then of course they made a movie, The Island of Dr. Moreau. Okay, this is where you had a doctor that was splicing humans with animals, and Enki was, that's kind of what he did. So he had already been messing around with the creatures that were already here on Earth. And he was like, okay, don't kill the Igigi. Let's just go ahead and do something to alleviate their load. And it says, Bela Ili, the midwife, is present. Let her create then a human, a man. Let him bear the yoke. Let man assume the drudgery of the god. So we were originally created to be workers. Let that sink in for a minute. But that's the reason why God created man, is because we were supposed to be workers. Now, with this, I go through, it's not really detailed, but it gives us a little bit of an idea of what they did. And of course, we get into the idea of the clay. Now, we talk about, the dust of the earth. That's what God breathed the breath of life into to create Adam. And then, of course, all the other creation myths. Some kind of an element that was already here. Well, in this case, they used clay. And I'll get into that here in just a minute. I want to go into a few other things here. Okay, so the first trial and error that they went through, they took the egg of a being that was already in existence here on Earth. Anthropologically speaking, this would be Homo erectus. That would be the hominid. So they took from a female Homo erectus, they took the egg, and then they took the sperm from an Anunnaki male. And using their tools. Now, originally they were doing the genetic manipulation, the essentially in vitro fertilization. They were doing it in a crystal vessel. Now, it's like a petri dish or something along those lines, test tube, whatever. But they were using a crystal vessel that came from Nibiru. And the product that they were getting was not what they were wanting. This is one of the ways that the primitive people that actually, wrote these epics and everything, this could have been the way that they would have been explaining birth defects. Because the gods were, kind of messing around with things, and they didn't quite get the mixtures right, and they were using the wrong vessels, and this is the reason why we get the birth defects. Now, there is actually an ancient story called Enki and Enki, and it talks about how Enki and Enki, they get drunk, and they have a contest, and it's where Enki tells Nenma that she could create a being that would be so messed up, and he could still find a job for this being. And he does. Every time she creates something really off the wall, person can't see, can't hold their bladder, can't walk, can't talk, all these what would be birth defects. And Enki constantly finds a job for him. And of course, it finally comes down to where Nenma is like, okay, then now you try. And so Enki creates something that is so horrific, so deformed, that there's nothing that can be done with it. And Nenma was like, well, why did this happen? Why did you make this? How could you make this thing so deformed that we can't do anything with it? And Enki said, because I didn't use a womb. See, everything has to have a womb in order to be created. So the idea of God blowing the breath of life into dust in order to create man, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. You have to be born. And that's what it tells us in these ancient texts, is it says that they were born. There was a womb involved. So they finally figured out that they needed to use something of earth. They needed to make a vessel out of something of earth. And this is the idea, where we get the idea of the clay. Now, so they finally got a being that was what they wanted. Okay, his limbs were proper, hind parts like legs, fore parts like hands were shaped, shaggy like the wild ones he was not, dark black his head hair was, smooth was his skin, smooth as the Anunnaki skin it was, like dark red blood was its color, like the clay of the Abzu was its hue. Okay. There's a lot of controversy, especially nowadays. I mean, you got organizations like Black Lives Matter. And you have individuals who, well, if they are black, if they are African American or African or whatever terminology you want to use, a lot of them will say, well, the first man was black. Well, and then of course they use that to, express some sort of dominance. But according to this, yes, the first Adam would have been considered black. He was a dark blood red. Now, when we come down here, Enki is, sitting there saying, hey, this isn't a being, this isn't a creature, this is a being, this is a person. So what are you going to name him? And it says, Adamu I shall call him, Nemo saying, one who like earth's clay is, that will be his name. Okay. When Sitchin first addressed this in his earlier books, in the Earth Chronicles, he said that Adamu meant first man or primitive worker. Now, we see this here. This is Sitchin's greatest opponent. This is Dr. Michael S. Heiser. And Dr. Heiser went ahead and created a whole entire website called Sitchin is Wrong. And this is one of the things that he points out that Sitchin was wrong. It says pages 336 through 357 of the 12th planet, on pages 158 and 162 of his book Genesis Revisited, is where he talks about Adamu being called primitive worker. It's also supposed to be first man. But Dr. Heiser says that Adamu, according to Akkadian Sumerian dictionaries, and he spells it, the correct way, does not mean man. Rather, Adamu refers to blood, the color red. So I think Mr. Sitchin went ahead and corrected his error when he created the Lost Book of Enki. Instead of meaning primitive worker or first man or anything like that, he went ahead and said Adamu was what Ninmah named the first man, and this wouldn't have been the first Homo sapien. This would have been more along the lines of Cro-Magnon or even Denisovan. This would have been the cavemen. So wouldn't even have been, the first human. Would have been Cro-Magnon, earlier hominid. But the whole idea of the blood red color and everything, we see that. Okay, so in Africa, they have red clay. This would have been the clay that Ninmah would have used to make the vessel, and this would have been the reason why she would have named Adamu what she named him, meaning red like Earth's clay. Okay. So, the next thing that we get into, well, if I can get the right one, yeah. And again, that's not the right one. And these are all out of order. Oh, okay. Okay, so Adamu and his wife Tiamat. Okay, not Eve. Okay, Tiamat is actually the reason why they named the first woman Tiamat is in homage to the first mother in their mythology. The Enuma Elish. That's something that supposedly was in their mythology. Tiamat was the first mother. Now, when we look at the L.W. King version of the Enuma Elish, this is where we see that, these weren't gods per se, these were planets. And Tiamat, or if we look at the giant impact hypothesis, Gaia, which is what science called first Earth. That's what Tiamat was first Earth. But she was supposed to be the mother of all the other gods. So, first woman was named Tiamat. Okay, so these two were created, and then 14 more were created. There was a total of 16. Now, this is still not really that much when it comes to diversity for a gene pool, but I don't think they were just mating with each other. I think they also brought in some of the other Homo erectus, the other hominids, and they mated with them, and that way you've got a little bit more in the way of diversity. Because with even 16, that's still not really enough to have a diverse gene pool, and you will start having some genetic anomalies. Okay. So, let's see. Okay. It says, day and night the earthlings he was watching their doings to ascertain. Indeed, he saw them mating. The males and females were inseminating. Conceiving there was not. Birth giving there was not. So when these beings were created, they were essentially hybrids. Now, when we think hybrid, the most common hybrid that comes to people's minds, well, there's two, but the main one is the mule. You can't take a male mule and a female mule and put them together, have them mate, and get a baby mule. It doesn't happen. They're sterile. The way you make a mule is you have a horse and a donkey. So when you have a hybrid, they're sterile. And this is what Enki's seen. He's seen that they were mating, but no conception was happening. So it says, by two kinds combined, a curse has been created, Enki to the other said. Okay, well, it wasn't a curse. It was hybridization. And with hybridization, you have sterility. So they went ahead and they examined the DNA, and they found out that there was an issue with some of the genes because of the hybridization. Now here's where we get into the idea of the serpent in the garden. Okay, first of all, Serpent, the Serpent clan, which was what Enki ran. He was the leader of the Serpent clan. The Serpent, to the Anunnaki, was what we would see as a Chinese dragon. It had legs. When we read the Lost Book of Enki at the very beginning, when it talks about Alelu, when he first came to Earth, because he was the first one to be on Earth, and he was looking for water, and he came across a snake. No legs. It scared the crap out of him. He'd never seen one before, because that's not what they considered a serpent. Okay, so when Enki seen that they weren't conceiving, he went ahead and told his son Nangishita to go ahead and put Enki and Ninma to sleep, and to put Adamu and Tiamat to sleep. And then Nangishita extracted DNA, bone marrow, from Enki and Ninma, and he took it from their rib. He took it from their sternum. Now, when we look into genetic research, because that area, that bone marrow, is so close to the heart, it's the most pure. It's the best material to use for genetic research. So this material was extracted from Enki and Ninma, and then Ningishita did some genetic manipulation, and we can actually see that. We do that today. That's CRISPR. That's where you can actually take, a little bit of DNA of something that you actually want to be a trait in some organism, and you insert it into their DNA. That's CRISPR. And that's basically what they were doing. So CRISPR is something that's, it's relatively new, but it's not. It's actually a rediscovery of something that has been done thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the whole what was all done, because my next video I'm going to go into it a lot more, because there was some things done other than allowing it to where we could procreate. There was a couple of things that were done also, and I'll get into that a little later. Okay, so one of the things that like I said, Enki was the leader of the Serpent clan. And when we come here, this is... Okay, the first thing that I need to point out, Nibiru, heaven, is not like Earth. Okay, first of all, the gravity is stronger, the pressure is stronger, because it is a larger planet, and because it has a very thick atmosphere. Okay, it also does not receive as much sunlight. In fact, it doesn't really receive any sunlight unless it's close to the sun. When it's far out, when it's way out beyond the Kuiper Belt, it doesn't get any sun at all. So it's dark. And one of the things that's interesting is even in the Bible, when it talks about heaven, especially at the end, it said there will be one light in heaven, and that will be the light of God. One light, that's it. It shows that heaven is dark. And if you don't have that one light, then you're not going to be able to see. But the other thing is because it doesn't receive sunlight, the only thing that keeps Nibiru warm is its core. Now, it has been brought up to scientists and astronomers, and they've been asked the hypothetical question: how could life evolve on a rogue planet? And that's essentially what Nibiru is. It was a rogue planet. And they said, okay, well, hypothetically speaking, if the atmosphere is dense enough and the core is hot enough, and the heat that comes from the core kind of bounces off this really thick atmosphere, this could potentially allow life to start. So that's what we have. We have this thick atmosphere, which, because you have to go down through these layers of atmosphere just to get to the surface, you've got your intense pressure. Nibiru is larger, anywhere from 2 to 4 times, although even some people say it's about as big as Jupiter. I don't know. But it's a large planet. And because of its size and its mass, it's going to have a stronger gravity. And of course, no light, unless of course it's close to the sun. But it's also, the temperature is a lot lower than Earth's. And that's one of the things that we see here. It says, and they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Okay, it points that out, the whole idea of the cool of the day. Here you supposedly have this omnipotent God that wouldn't care less if it was hot, if it was cold. You know, these things shouldn't bother this all-powerful God, but he walks in the cool of the day. And the reason why, and of course this Lord God, this is Enlil. But he's walking in the cool of the day because that's where it's the most comfortable. When they got here to Earth, it was hot. Now, it wasn't hot for us because they were still essentially in the middle of an ice age. And it's like, it tells us that when Enlil first tried to land, he didn't know where to land, because snow and ice was covering everything. So he couldn't tell what was land and what was water. So Earth was essentially in an ice age. But this small little area in the equatorial region, which is now essentially the Persian Gulf, there was dry land that could be seen. But it was still too warm compared to what they were used to on Nibiru. So he walked in the cool of the day. Okay, so here is where we're talking about, the temptation of Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay, that's not what it was. Okay, first of all, there's a couple things. Serpent in ancient times wasn't something evil. Serpent actually meant knowledge, wisdom, intelligence. Okay, so the idea of the serpent giving knowledge, giving wisdom to Adam and Eve wasn't because it was a bad thing. And this is one of the things that when I was in the church that I had a real problem with. I always seen it as God wants us to remain ignorant. We're not supposed to look into things. We're not supposed to gain knowledge. That's what it always sounded like. You weren't supposed to question. You were supposed to have blind obedience. And that's one of the things that it's the reason why I got out of the church. So the idea of gaining knowledge, yeah, this is something that we weren't supposed to do. Okay, but here's the one thing that I'm wanting to point out. Remember I said that the Anunnaki seen a serpent as essentially a long, sinuous body with legs. Well, this is where God chastises the serpent. And it says, upon thy belly shalt thou go. Okay, when you first read this, and I did the same thing when I was in the church, It's like, wait a minute, serpent's a snake. Snake's always on its belly. So how is this, a punishment? Again, when we get into the Anunnaki theory and we understand the idea that the serpent was actually essentially a Chinese dragon, then the whole idea of removing the feet, removing the legs of the serpent to make it a snake, yeah, that makes more sense now. Now, the way that I see this, since it was Enki that did this, since he was the one that did this further genetic manipulation against Enlil's decree, Enki got dressed down. Now, I know it's not something that actually happens. You see it in movies a lot where you've got a soldier who's being demoted and they rip his stripes off. Okay? That's what I see happening. You've got Enki being dressed down because he went against Enlil's decree. And so, as a symbol of his demotion, they ripped the legs off of the serpent, making it a snake, no longer a serpent. Okay. Now, we're going to get into the second Adam. And the second Adam is Adapa. Now, there's a bit of a mythology around Adapa. Adapa, in this, the story Adapa and the South Wind. Basically, Adapa was out fishing, and the South Wind kind of screwed him up a little bit, and so he freaking beat it up. It says, angry, Adapa broke the wings of the South Wind. And of course, it's because of this. Well, let me go ahead and get into Adapa, because getting into the mythology after he's grown and everything, we want to know the origin of Adapa. So the origin of Adapa. Now let's see if I can find this. Oh, I remember. It's right here. Okay. So, in his heart, Enki, a new undertaking was scheming. To create a civilized mankind in his heart he conceived. Grains that are sown by them to be cultivated. Ewes that become sheep. Sheep let them shepherd. Okay, so basically what's going on is, at this point, the decree, be fruitful and multiply, has come down, and they didn't realize that, mankind, first man actually took that quite to heart, and there was a lot of mankind. Not only that, but there were still more Anunnaki that were coming from Nibiru to help, with the work, and also to stake their claim in the different regions of Earth. And of course, Earth was still somewhat in an ice age, but it was starting to come out of. So there were still more people. I mean, there was a lot of people, and they weren't being able to feed everybody. Now you had the Cro-Magnon individuals that were still working in the mines, but you didn't want to take from that workforce. You needed to create a new workforce. The primitive workers in the Abzu, he for this scheme observed. The earthlings in the Eden, in the cities, and in the orchards he considered. What could for the tasks make them suited? What by the life essences has not been combined? Okay, so he's seeing everybody, and he's like, okay, I made the Cro-Magnon or the Denisovan or whatever they would have been, But what can I do to make another worker that would, not necessarily be working heavy manual labor, but would take care of making the food and making the, taking care of the sheep and growing the crops and everything like that. So what he did is he actually seen 2 of the Cro-Magnon females, and he impregnated them. Now, Enki was a bit of a lech. He was very promiscuous. So this is not something that, would be out of his purview. But this is where we get the Adam and Eve that is outside of the garden, because they never were in Eden. And this is the father and mother of Cain and Abel. Okay, so this is talking about the birth, and it says, at dawn and dusk, which a day delimit, on the same day the 2 were born, the gracious ones, dawn and dusk, thereafter and legends they were known. Now, the way that reads, it almost sounds as if the children that were born were called dawn and dusk, but it could also be the 2 female, the Cro-Magnons that became dawn and dusk. Now, the interesting thing is what is another name, another word for dusk? Eve, or evening. So, again, the way that that's worded, it could go one way or the other. But, this was all done pretty much in secret. And after they were born, then Izimud, which is Enki's vizier, went ahead and brought the children to Nenki, which is Enki's wife. And she's the one that named them Adapa, the foundling, and Titi. It says one with life, but actually Titi is Sumerian for Eve. So this would have been the Adam and Eve that's outside of the garden. And one thing that Adapa became a king. I mean, that's what it talks about in the myth. The one here, he was a king. And then, of course, he was brought to heaven. He was brought to heaven to meet Anu. And the reason why he did that is because he broke the wings of the south wind. Now, Anu wanted to meet him. But Enki, being he's known as a trickster god. He told Adapa that when you go, you're going to be offered vestments, which you're supposed to wear. And that does happen. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah. Okay. I thought I had everything where it needs to be. Okay. Let's see. It says, to Negashita and Demuzi, the garb of Igigi was given like celestial eagles they were dressed. As for Adapa, his unkempt hair was shaven. Now, I don't know if that meant that he was bald or if they just went ahead and cut his hair. A helmet as that of an eagle he was given. Instead of his loincloth, a tight-fitting vestment he was made to wear. Remember, I told you, Nibiru has higher pressure and higher gravity. He had to have been given some kind of clothing, some kind of a suit that would protect him. Because humans are not meant to be in heaven. And it's not because, privilege or anything like that. It's because we won't survive. So, anyway, he's given the vestments, he puts those on, and Enki told him, you're supposed to do that. But Enki's told Adapa, he's like, look, once you meet Anu, they're going to have a feast, and they're going to offer you food and drink. But Anu is pissed because you broke the south wind. So he's going to give you food that is poisoned. So you're not supposed to eat or drink anything. So Adapa goes and he's in front of Anu, and Anu presents food and drink to him, and he refuses to eat. Now, this irritates Anu. This is disrespect. And Anu questions Adapa. He's like, why won't you eat? And he's like, my lord Anu, I was told by my lord Enki that you were mad at me, you were upset at me, and that you were going to kill me with poisoned food and drink. Now, because he'd already refused it, it was taken away, and it wasn't offered again. And Anu kind of laughed at the whole idea that Enki told Adapa this. It's like, my son's a trickster. He lied to you. He fooled you. What I was offering you was the bread of life and the water of life. If you would have partaken it, you wouldn't have died. You would have lived forever. But, like I said, everything was taken away and it wasn't offered again. Well, Adapa didn't leave empty-handed. He was actually given wisdom. So when he came back to Earth, he was able to rule his people wisely. And that's the story of Adapa. Now, with Adapa, this is where we get into Cain and Abel. Now, Abel was taught by Marduk. Now, we all know about Marduk, but he was taught by Marduk to be a shepherd. And Cain was taught by Ninurta to be a farmer. Now, most people know the story of Cain and Abel. The whole idea that there was supposed to be a feast, and they presented no, do I have it? No, it's okay. They presented their meals, the foods that they were supposed to have, where Abel presented the meats, which the gods loved so much. Okay. And then Cain presented vegetables and grains and things like that, and of course they didn't really care for that. And there was the whole jealousy thing, and Cain killed Abel. Well, remember, Marduk trained Abel. So Marduk had vested interest. And Marduk ordered the execution of Cain. Now, Enki had been keeping this secret for a long time. The whole idea that Adapa and Titi were his son and daughter. Therefore, Adapa and Titi was Marduk's brother and sister, thus making Cain his nephew. And they don't kill their family. They don't hurt their family. And when it was found out that this was family, they had to come up with some other punishment. Well, this is where we get the banishment of Cain. And of course, in the Bible, it says that he was sent to Nod. And there he found a wife. Well, here in the Lost Book of Enki, this is how Zecharia Sitchin puts it. An Eridu judgment upon Cain by Enki was pronounced. Eastward to a land of wandering, for his evil did, Cain must depart. That his life must be spared, he and his generations shall be distinguished. Okay. This is talking about the mark of Cain. Now, you have some that I believe have latent racist ideas that say that the mark of Cain is people being black. I've heard that for a long time. Now, I've already pointed out that Adamu was essentially black. So, that's not the case. Sitchin gives us a different telling. Sitchin tells us that by Nengashita was the life essence of Cain altered, that his face a beard should not grow. Cain's life essence Nengashita changed. The mark of Cain is the inability to grow facial hair. That's the mark of Cain. Now, I'm not going to say a race, but there is a race out there that has difficulty growing facial hair. This is because it passed down through the generations. That's what it says here. He and his generations shall be distinguished. The only way, and it only mitigates it a little bit, the only way is if they breed way out of their line. But because they were sent to the land of wandering, and Cain's spouse, now it says his sister, and I don't know if it was actually a full sister or if it was a half sister, but that was the spouse he took. Because in the Bible it says that when he went to the land of Nod, it said there he found a spouse. Now they could still look at that, because you got to remember, the Homo sapien wasn't the only thing on the earth at the time. You still had the Homo erectus and the Neanderthal. You had the other hominids. So Cain could have found a wife, even though, and again, these are the ones that were racist. A lot of individuals think that the wife that he found when he went to Nod was actually a female gorilla. This is just absurd. It's absurd, it's racist, it's prejudice. This is the reason why, when the way Sitchin puts it, it actually, first of all, makes more sense, and it is not in any way, shape, or form offensive. Now I'm going to go into one final thing, because it does have to do with the descendants of Cain. Okay, so when we get into, and we're going to come back here to the Atrahasis, when we get into the ark, and like I said, Atrahasis is the name of Noah according to the Babylonians, Zasudra and Utnapishtim to the Sumerians. Okay. One of the things that we have to understand, it wasn't just Noah and his family. Okay, the story goes that when, and this is Zasudra, when Enki, who, by the way, is Zasudra's father, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. This is the first time we actually hear about this scenario, but it is used in the Arthurian legend. When Uther Pendragon and how Arthur was conceived. Okay, Uther fell in love with one of his lord's wives. And so Uther sent this lord to war, basically a suicide mission. And then Uther had Merlin change his appearance to look like this lord, and he went to this wife, and he conceived Arthur. That's how Arthur... Okay, so in the story of Zasudra's birth, you have Enki, you have Lumak, which he was the lord, and you have Batanash. And Enki sent Lumak to Lagash to work with Marduk, to be trained in stoneworking and things like this. And then Enki went to Batanash and mated with her. I mean, he's a lech. He does this all the time. And the product was Zasudra. And when Zasudra was born, he was born with white hair. Now, this is a land of black-headed people. So being born with white hair, this is the thing that set him apart. And it was said that he would be the savior of mankind and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so Zasudra was a hybrid. Noah was a hybrid. In the Bible, it says that when Noah built the ark, he was 600 years old. And this would be the reason why it would make sense. He was a hybrid. He was essentially a demigod. Okay, so when it was found out that the earth was going to be flooded, and the gods didn't do that, it was a celestial event that caused the deluge. The only thing that Enlil, God, Yahweh, he wasn't going to warn mankind. He was going to allow us to become extinct. God, Yahweh, Jehovah, wanted us dead. And it wasn't because we were wicked. It wasn't because we were wicked. It wasn't because of the Nephilim. It wasn't because of the giants. It wasn't any of that. It was because there was too many of us. We were making too much noise, and Enlil couldn't get sleep. That's what it was. That's the whole reason why he wanted us to go extinct. There was too many people. So anyway, Enki was sworn to secrecy. He was told, you're not supposed to tell the people. You're supposed to let them die. Oh, Enki was prideful. These were his creations. He didn't want to see them die. Especially his son, Zasudra. So he went, and his son was in a hut. And it was a reed hut. And Enki went up to the side of the hut, outside of it, up to the wall, close to where Zasudra was sleeping. And he addressed the wall and told the wall that this thing was happening. There was going to be a great deluge, and that Enlil was angry, and he was going to destroy the earth, and that Zasudra had to build this boat and take all these people and take these animals and just wait it out. That's how he got around his vow. He didn't tell Zasudra, he told the wall. And of course, this is where it says, wall, listen to me, read wall, pay attention to all my words. Okay, so Zasudra woke up and he ran out to the village, and in this village they worshipped both. They worshipped Enki and they worshipped Enlil. And Zasudra was like, my lord Enki, or your lord Enlil is mad at my lord Enki, and he said he is going to destroy everybody if we don't get out of here. And because of this, the worshippers of Enlil were like, well, shoot, you need to get the heck out of here. And so they gathered all together, all the stuff necessary to build the ark. It wasn't just Noah and his family. It was the entire village that helped him build this ark. And it wasn't just Noah and his family that were the only ones that were on the ark. The other ones that were on the ark were the other Enkyites, the other individuals that worshipped Enki. They were going to get the hell out of Dodge too. So this is where it would make sense. I mean, you'd have the whole incest situation just like with Adam and Eve if it was just Noah and his family. And that's not the case. It was Noah, his family, and these other Enkyites that were on the ark. Now, here's where I was saying with the descendants of Cain. After the deluge, and of course they seen that Noah and his family and the others and so on and so forth were still alive, come to find out that the descendants of Cain were also still alive, because they were warned some way, shape, or form. Doesn't really go into how they were warned, but they were warned, and they took refuge on a high mountain, and this is believed to be the Himalayas. So this is the reason why we still have the mark of Cain to today. Okay, I'm going to go into one last thing. When we get into the idea of the flood and the ark, a lot of people think the ark was just this big boat. It had a keel, it had a bow, everything like that. But we have the chief Assyriologist at the British Museum, Irving Finkel. And he was given a more complete tablet of the Atrahasis, the Epic of Atrahasis. And it's interesting. I love watching him read cuneiform, because he doesn't even have to write it down and go through the transliteration and everything. Like, he can just pick up a piece of cuneiform and just read it right from the cuneiform itself. So he picked up this piece of cuneiform and he read it, and his eyes just got big as baseballs, because here was a more complete version, and it actually described the ark, what the actual ark was. And what the actual ark, according to that more complete Atrahasis, was not this boat shaped. It didn't have a keel, it didn't have a bow. It was what was called, in that region, it's called a coracle. It's a round boat. And here in this video, he actually takes the dimensions that are described in this more complete version of the Atrahasis, and with a team, they actually go and build the ark the way it is actually described. And it doesn't. Now, from the side, you see this picture here. This is essentially a profile. And from the side, yeah, that does kind of look like a boat. But that is actually round. That is a large coracle. So that's what the ark would have been. So that's the tale of two Adams and things that are associated. Basically, in the Christian Bible and in the Torah and things like that, this would essentially be the first part of Genesis. There's not a lot that really that is relevant for today. I primarily did this one because in the next video I need the context, and I don't like doing videos where I'm talking about something that I should have had, previous information of. So I went ahead and did this because my next video I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth of the genetic manipulation that was done to us, done to Cro-Magnon, that helped generate us. So I needed the two Adams. I needed some of the information that I presented here, so that you wouldn't be left in the dark when I go into my next video. But I hope this was enlightening. Again, all of the source material that I use will be in the description, and that way you can go and look for yourself. I'm the Anunnaki Theorist. Enjoy.